Alright, so the Flysky FSI6X Radio has got a whole list of improvements and features with the latest version of OpenTX firmware, and that's what we will take a look at in this video. So first, let's install the OpenTX version 1.4 on the radio transmitter. So from the GitHub website, I'll download the firmware file. So there are three versions of the firmware file. The first one has the ExpressLRS support, and the second one can be used if you're using the radio for a helicopter, and the third one is just a regular firmware. And all of these firmware files have the support for external module for PPM and crossfire, and along with USB joystick functionality. I'll be installing the ExpressLRS file, so I'll download that. I'll connect the radio to the computer and then enter the radio in DFU mode by holding the horizontal trims inwards and then powering up the radio transmitter. I'll launch STM32Cube programmer and then connect the radio and then select the firmware file and click on download. Disconnect and then power cycle the radio transmitter. Alright, so now that I have the latest version of OpenTX flashed on the radio transmitter, we can now take a look at the new features and improvements. So firstly, if I navigate between the home screen, we have a new option called channel monitor and mixer monitor. So in here we can see all the channels represented from -100 to +100 along with a slider representation. So you can simply navigate to this mixer and channel page within the home screen and then view all the channels. The next up is this tiny square icon on the top right corner, which has now disappeared, and that's a very handy feature because it's going to save you a lot of time. So with the help of that tiny square icon, we can decide when to shut the radio transmitter safely so that we don't lose our settings. So sometimes with the previous version, you must have noticed that after making some of the changes in the radio transmitter, they would not save. And that's because we did not have an indication if the settings are still being written or saved in the radio. So to prevent that from happening, we have this tiny square icon. So for example, if I make a few changes in the first module, and if I turn off the radio before the square icon disappears, I would lose all the settings that I just set up. And to confirm that, yes, so as you can see that channel 5, which was set for switch A, was not saved. And whereas if I wait for the square icon to disappear and then turn off the radio transmitter, I will then have all the settings as it is. So the square icon has disappeared, and that means I can turn off the radio and not lose my settings. So all of the changes in the mixer page are saved properly. So with the help of this square icon, we can now safely shut down the radio transmitter without losing the settings. And that's a very helpful feature which will save us a lot of time. Now the next improvements are in the radio setup. So if I hold the bind button, the first is the tools page. Now with the previous version, we could navigate between the menu with the pot, but that's been disabled because Sometimes that was annoying, and sometimes the settings would accidentally change by scrolling the port. So that's been disabled. And on the better side, we can navigate to the previous page by holding the bind button. So to navigate to the next page, simply toggle the bind button once, and to go back to the previous page, hold the bind button. So again, this will save you a lot of time and make the experience a whole lot better. Now let's take a look at the hardware page. So in here there are a few improvements and features. So if you have seen my Bluetooth telemetry video, you must have seen that there was this option called serial port telemetry. And that was actually a test version of the firmware file. But with version 1.4, the serial port telemetry option is now available for everyone. With this, you can send the telemetry data to a Bluetooth device and then access that on your cell phone or computer. If you want to know more about that, you can click on this iCard and then watch that video. And this is also a very important feature if you want to lock the telemetry data on your cell phone, especially if you're a long-range pilot. And not to forget that we do have the mega baud rates, so up to 1.8 million. In the previous version, we did not have the battery calibration option, but now we have it. So if you click on OK, you can adjust the settings for the battery voltage. So if I connect my voltage meter, so it's set properly by default, but if you need to make changes, you can do that from here. So we have the option to calibrate the battery voltage. And by the way, I'm using a 2S battery to power up the radio transmitter. I've been getting a lot of questions if it's safe to power the radio with the 2S battery directly without any voltage regulators. I've been using the radio with the battery for about 2 months and I've had no issues so far. And if you notice that the calibration option is now a part of the hardware page. Earlier there used to be a separate page for calibration, but now we have it in the hardware page. So let me calibrate since the EEPROM data was formatted. So click on OK to start. Center your gimbals and pods. And then also move the pods slowly in both the directions so that the pods are also calibrated. And then click on OK once that's done. So the pods and the gimbals have been calibrated. And if you want to factory reset the radio, you can do that from the hardware page itself. So scroll all the way to the bottom and then you will have the option of factory reset. So you can click on OK and reset the radio transmitter. And here we have the version page, so version 1.4. And the font for this is slightly different. Now some users had requested to allow the radio to be powered from a 3.5 volt battery. And you could power up the radio with a 3.5 volt LiPo cell or a single cell LiPo. But the problem was the low battery voltage alarm, and since it couldn't go below 4 volts, the radio would constantly beep and irritate the hell out of you. So to prevent that, we can now set the battery low alarm to 3.5 volts. So if you're someone who's using a single cell lithium battery and you want to set the battery low voltage to 3.5 volts, you can now do that. But since I'm using a 2S, I set this to 7.4 volts or 3 volts. Now next up is the USB joystick mode. Now in the earlier versions, there was an issue where the radio would reboot when we would use the radio for simulator. And that problem has been addressed, and I can tell you for a fact that the reboot cycle is almost non-existent. You might have to reboot the radio maybe once or twice, but not after that, especially when you're operating the radio in the simulator software. So if I select joystick in the USB detect, the square icon will be displayed as long as you are in the simulator mode. And if I connect the USB cable and connect it to the computer, you can see that I haven't had a single reboot yet, and I can see the radio values in the USB game controller settings. And I've disabled the USB joystick mode and the square icon is off. And as you saw that I did not have to restart the radio from a USB reboot issue, because then there would be an exclamation mark over here, and that would indicate that the radio would have to be restarted. And since we did not have that, it clearly indicates that the USB joystick feature is improved and a lot better. And also when you're using the radio with a simulator, you will notice that the latency is also reduced. So the simulator experience with this radio is now improved and enhanced. The next is a big feature, and for that I'll create a new model. And in the internal RF settings, previously we had PWM, IBus, SBus and PPM, but now we have IBus 16 and SBus 16. So if you're someone who wants to use SBus and use 16 channels, you can now do that with this radio transmitter. So IBus 16 and SBus 16. And to demonstrate that, I'll bind the radio to my X6B receiver, which is in this Cinevoop. So the receiver is in binding mode, and I can bind the radio to that. And the receiver is bound. So if I launch Betaflight, in the receiver settings, you can see that the first 4 channels are working. So let me fill up all the channels in the mixer page. So I've just randomly added all the aux and pots for the remaining channels. So all the 16 channels in the radio are assigned to something. And we can see that in the channel monitor or the mixer monitor as well. And in Betaflight you can see that all the aux channels have the slider values on the right side. So aux 9 in Betaflight is channel 16 and aux 10 is channel 17, which is assigned for link quality index. So in the OSD tab in Betaflight, if you enable the link quality option, you can monitor the link quality in your OSD while flying. So you can check how solid the connection is between the radio and the receiver. So to use S-Bus 16 and I-Bus 16, you must have a receiver which supports automatic frequency hopping digital system 2A or the second version of the Flysky protocol. It's not supported with the previous version of the Flysky protocol or the automatic frequency hopping digital system version 1. If you have a receiver that does not support FS2A, then you won't be able to use S-Bus 16, so just keep that in mind. Now next up, let's take a look at the ExpressLRS settings and options which are now available with the latest version of OpenTX firmware. So I'll connect my R9M module to the radio transmitter and power up the receiver in the quad. So if I enter the ExpressLRS menu and if I go to the bottom, we have a new option called other devices, and if I enter other devices, I can see Betaflight and FSI R9MM, and if I select Betaflight and in there I have an option called other devices, I can see options like FSI R9M, then R9MM and R9MB. I have a R9MX receiver and I don't see that over here. So for example, if I click on R9MP, I'm still in the FSI R9MM and I have other devices in that. So we have the transmitter module settings, but that's not what I'm looking for. So for some reason it's not working as intended with my setup. But from some of the images I've seen from Mr. Janik, he has a few extra options in the other devices settings. For some reason I'm not able to see those options for my transmitter and receiver module. But you could try the other devices option and play around with the settings. Once I'm able to figure this out and I get it working, I will post a separate video on this. But just to let you guys know that there is a new option called other devices with the latest version of OpenTX for this radio transmitter. And as for your information, with OpenTX 1.4 on this radio transmitter, the ExpressLRS menu is ready to accept ExpressLRS 3.0 transmitter module and receiver. So what that means is, whenever ExpressLRS version 3 is available, you can flash it on your transmitter module and connect it to the radio transmitter and use it. So you won't have to update the ExpressLRS menu as such. It's already programmed and ready to accept ExpressLRS 3.0. And that's about it. That's all I had to share in this video. If you want to know more, you can visit the GitHub website and read through all the bugs and fixes the latest version has. I've only covered some of the points that I felt were important and had to be addressed. And once again, a huge thanks to Mr. Janik and Mariano for implementing OpenTX firmware on this radio transmitter. All of the new features and improvements have been implemented by Mr. Janik, and we have to thank him for that. So comment below what you think of the new features we have with OpenTX version 4 on this radio transmitter. So thanks a lot for watching and stay tuned for more videos.